Hey guys, this is Gavin Brooks. Today is the release of my final EP of 6 in this summer release campaign. The artist title is Making Up for Lost Time. The EP title is Making Up for Lost Time. You can check it out. I'm now going to quickly talk a bit about what this EP is like, what it sounds like, what its contents are, how it feels, and then move on a bit to how it was made because it has a pretty interesting story and was made 8 years ago. And then finally, I'm going to reflect a bit on this entire process, what I've learned from finishing and releasing all of this music this summer, the perspective it's given me on music in general, and what my plans are going forward from now. So what is the quality of Making Up for Lost Time? This is predominantly electronic music. There is occasionally a guitar or bass used, but the focus really are the electronic elements and all the sound design effort that was put there. It tends to be heavily layered with the electronic elements, and on top of everything is this big layered vocal sound, which is the driving force of this project. You could say that this is sort of my take on pop music, where it is very vocal driven. It uses a predictable format with repeated choruses. The exception to that being the first track, which is kind of an intro track, and all of the tracks are also drumless, except for track 2, Reminiscing. If I had to throw out some feelings out there for what this is like from an emotional standpoint, it is definitely ethereal, sad, emotionally heavy, has a feeling of yearning, intensity. Now, for the history of how this project was made. My first alias for electronic music was called Polyphony. And under that alias, I released 2 EPs and an album during my sophomore and junior year of high school. During that time, towards the end of it, I was messaged by Daniel Faulkner, who was I think only a year or 2 older than me, but was also in the Las Vegas area where I lived and had found my music through Bandcamp by exploring the electronic in Las Vegas tag. Daniel very simply asked me, hey, do you want to play a show? He was this guy who was involved in the local music scene, and through him I did end up playing 3 shows. However, I would go to a lot more shows in this local scene that he introduced me to. Part of what was so cool about this music scene was how inclusive and open they were to different styles of music, particularly those that were more experimental. So in one night, you would see an electronic act, you would have that go into an emo band, and then you'd have that go into a pure noise experimental act, and then you'd have that go into a black metal band. And Daniel himself was in 2 projects that regularly played live in this circuit. One was called Hollow Gym, which was a sort of electronic ambient experimental duo, and then he was also in Wallower, which was kind of like black metal, black gaze type of thing. And through this scene, I would make buddies with someone named Wes. Wes played the very first show that I also played in this scene, and he was doing something in what was considered the bedroom pop style. He had a guitar, and he sang over a drum track. And me and Wes were kind of fascinated by what the other person was doing, and I think we were fascinated by each other's perspectives on music. He was kind of coming from a background and world of real instrumentation and short and sweet songs, and I was coming from a background of more electronic music at the time and kind of wanting to get more back into real instrumentation. And very much coming from the opposite perspective of making everything like very technical and dense. For example, one of those tracks on the Polyphony album I had released was a 20-minute long kind of odyssey. Wes and I agreed that we should try to make some music together. What if we combined our styles? And we demoed out, we wrote and recorded, but only half finished this album together. And so for a couple months, we were just seeing each other all the time, recording this music. And one of the times he was over at my place and we were doing some recording, he very casually was like, hey, actually, have you ever heard of this project? It's called Patterns for Feelings by Polaroid Summer. And Daniel made it. He kind of talked about it a little bit in like a hush-hush way, almost that it was a bit of a secret or something just that people didn't know about. I certainly had never heard of it. It wasn't something that was really promoted in an obvious way. You didn't know it was associated with him. And this project, Polaroid Summer, was like very sparkly sounding, electronic driven pop music perhaps, but with just this sad, melancholy energy and tone to it, and it was driven by clean melodic vocals. Very simple melodies, but very thoughtful melodies. And I have such a vivid memory of the room I was in with Wes when he showed it to me, and I remember the speakers we listened to it on, and I was standing up and hearing the first track. I instantly knew this is amazing music, this is going to be so important to me. It was already very important to Wes, and it would become very important to me in the coming year. So very simply, this project, Making Up for Lost Time, was completely inspired by the Polaroid Summer EP. I wanted to make something like that. The Polaroid Summer EP is 5 tracks. This EP is 5 tracks. The Polaroid Summer EP is driven by layered vocals and a sort of melodic pop, but straightforward vocal delivery style. That's the same thing I did with this EP. So I wrote, recorded, and mixed this music in a very intense, manic kind of storm in late May of 2016. Once it was done, I don't think I really had the confidence or comfortability with myself to share this heavily with people. There was a few friends I might have sent it to, but this was the first time I made something super earnest that kind of explored a lot of negative feelings. And it certainly was the first time I made something so lyrical. About a year later, in 2017, I got around to doing some final tweaking, mixing, and mastering, and I tried to pitch it to various small labels on Bandcamp, and none of them bit. So I never did anything with it. And then all these years later, I decided, hey, it's probably time to be done with this, to move on, to share it, have it stop being the skeleton in the closet. So I did some final tweaks this year, and now it is out. So now that this process is coming to a close, what did I learn from finishing and releasing 6 of my projects all back to back this summer? A really important but kind of obvious thing was realizing just how important it is to finish things when they are something that is still relevant to you. I've had a habit a lot of times of spending a ton of energy on a project, getting about to the 90% completion mark, and then forgetting about it, procrastinating it, moving on in certain ways, but also in other ways never moving on because it's never been finished or shared. I think part of the reason I've done this is that there is a fear and anxiety around finishing a project in which you must accept that this is what you've made. Whatever problems you may have with it, whatever you may have mixed feelings about, it happened, and it's not going to change in the last 10%. And I think it's taken me a long time to just be okay with yeah, I made that. It's a strange double-edged thing where on one hand I pour all of my energy into it and I'm so obsessed and insane about every single detail and I make things exactly how I want. But then sometimes I sit back and go, is that me? Oh man, that might be a little embarrassing, or that might be tough to have to share that. But you get older, you get more comfortable with being you, and you go, yeah, that's me. I think there was a lot of times in the past too where I hoped maybe that in the last 10% of tweaking would somehow make it something that everyone would like, which is just insane and not true. I've really realized that if people don't vibe with the first 90% of the project, the main energy of it, it doesn't matter how well you polish it in the last 10%, they're probably not going to like it. And the people who really vibe with the 90%, the main energy and atmosphere of it, will forgive or even not even notice the 10% of things that may be off about it. I think it's good to polish your projects. You should finish things properly. There should be effort in the mixing. You should make sure all the details are right, that there aren't any mistakes or weird clicks or technical problems or off timings that you don't like. But the truth is that if people love your music, they're going to forgive those small things. And in fact, they may even come to embrace those small things that you think are problems. One of the most interesting parts of this whole experience has been to notice that everyone's kind of in a different mood for different music all the time. Between my guitar students, my friends, musician friends, people I don't know that just leave comments on the internet, there has been someone who said every project was their favorite. There was someone who said Ruiqan was their favorite of all of them. There was someone that said Vixen Aquatic was their favorite of all of them, etc. Every single one. Someone thought that was the best one compared to all the other ones. It helps me have this kind of bigger perspective about music, that music is temporary. It's a scary thing to say, because also life being temporary is a scary thing to say. But what feels so right now might not feel that way in 5 years or 10 years. And everyone else is like that too. Someone who's listening to your music might not get this piece of it right now, and they might get it in 10 years, or they might have gotten it 10 years ago. But if you don't share and put it out there, the people who do need to hear it right now won't be able to. Like this project I just released, Making Up for Lost Time, I made it 8 years ago. I love this project, but it's hard for me to get back into that place. It can almost slip a little bit into wanting to rewrite it or just do something new, which is the truth of this. If you hold on to ideas too long, at some point you have to just say, okay, let's just make a new project that feels more true to my sensibilities now, or what I would do now, rather than trying to change this thing from the past to make it what I would do today, because it's not something I did today. It's something I did 8 years ago. And I needed it to be that way 8 years ago. I needed to feel this way 8 years ago. I don't feel exactly like this today, but someone else out there might be feeling the way I felt 8 years ago right now. So finally, now that this is over, what is next for me? I'm ready to kind of go back to the way things were before, where I just played a ton of guitar all the time, and I loved that, and it is my center that keeps me sane. So I'm looking forward to taking on new students, getting my guitar course out there, and I'm gonna be returning to the project that I was working on in March and April of this year, which is melodic, shreddy, really guitar virtuoso type music It feels like the culmination of all the work I've done on guitar. It's the thing that just feels the most exciting and relevant right now. That's the kind of music I want to play. It feels directly connected to my musicianship and my work as a guitar player, and I'm just so excited to dive into that. Thank you to anyone who has watched all 6 of these videos, who's listened to all 6 EPs, who's been here with me on this journey. Crazy or not, there are a lot of unfinished projects I still have, but for now, I feel pretty satisfied to have these 6 out, and I really look forward to starting the next chapter.